Hello, everyone. This is Joe Brewer, your host for these webinars and for the Earth Regenerator Study Group. I am really happy to have all of you here today. I believe this is the 11th webinar in our series, so we have quite a few others that you can go back and watch if ever you like. Today, we're going to be talking about how to regenerate entire landscapes, and we're going to use the example of Barichara, Colombia as our example. And the reason for that is that my family has been living here since last November, meeting with different groups doing local work and studying the landscape to try to find ways to participate. And I think we have a lot of very practical insights about how to think about bioregional design for entire landscapes that we can share in concrete ways so that it really becomes easy to understand how to think this way. Thank you all for introducing yourselves in the chat box, as many of you are already doing. We found in previous webinars that the chat space is a very good place for side conversations. So you can engage in conversations with each other, share links to content that you're talking about. A lot of great learning happens in the chat box. And what we're going to do today is we're going to have about 2 hours for the webinar. And the first roughly 30 minutes or so will be time when I will give a presentation that helps to frame and set the context for the discussion. And as many of you know who have attended these webinars before, there's a lovely option at the bottom of the screen called Ask a Question. And if you click on that, you can post questions during the presentation portion or afterwards. And also you can vote for the questions that you would like to have answered. And during the discussion period after the presentation, we will use those questions to shape the kind of conversation that we have. And a really nice thing about Crowdcast, the software that we're using, is that I can invite the person who asked the question into a shared video screen where they can come on with their video and we can have a conversation about the question and have more interaction than just listening to me answering it. I feel really, in a profound way, I feel humbled to be giving this presentation today because much of what I'm going to share, I've been learning from people doing work before we arrived in Barichara. And our hearts have been captured by this place. We just think it's so beautiful and so wonderful and has incredible potential for regeneration. And so today I feel very blessed to be able to share with you a way that my wife and I envision how this landscape could be transformed by activating and accelerating what is already here with a unified vision for the entire region. And as you can see in the chat that some of our friends from Barichara are here joining us today. So maybe we'll get the opportunity during the discussion period to hear some of their direct experiences, if any of them are interested. And we'll be highlighting some of their work during the presentation. And also for all of you who don't know, we have a study group called Earth Regenerators that is completely free to join. There's a button here that says join our study group, and that will take you to the Earth Regenerators. We currently have about 1,500 members, so it's become quite large. And it was originally structured around a book that I was writing for how to design for the regeneration of the Earth, and now has become quite a lot more with working groups and focus areas, this series of webinars. And all of this is offered completely free in the spirit of gift economy because I am supported on Patreon by my friends and by some fans. And so I'm able to just give everything away for free. And I feel really good and very supported to be able to do this. So if you feel like you want to support us, there will be ways to do that through the study group. But honestly, it feels transactional and superficial to ask for money to give this kind of education in the crisis that the planet is in at the moment. And so we just feel good to give everything away and co-create as much as possible. So again, I'm going to start the presentation in just a moment, where we will talk about how to regenerate an entire landscape. And when I start the presentation portion, if at any time you have questions, go to the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen, type in your question. vote for the questions that you would like to have answered. And then we will use those questions for the discussion afterwards. And just to say it one more time for those who arrived later, please use the chat box for side conversations. There's a lot of learning that happens in direct exchanges between participants in that chat box. Even though I may be speaking, there's a lot more to learn than what I have to say. So with that said, I'd love to get started and begin the presentation portion of the discussion. And I want to stress as we're getting started that the most important thing to have in mind here is I want to share a way of thinking, a way of designing for entire landscapes and for entire bioregions so that we can see how to create the economies of the future. And we're going to do that with what's happening in Barichara, but this is actually lessons for everywhere on Earth, using the specific things that are happening here to inspire us to think clearly. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. And here we go. The presentation is now beginning. So I want to start by saying that we're focused on the village of Barichara, which is a population of about 5,000 people. It's in the northern Andes of Colombia, in a region that, as we'll see, has experienced 500 years of colonialism and then later globalization and capitalistic extraction, causing a lot of damage to the land. And we're going to learn how to take a degraded landscape and see the potential for transforming it to bring all of the life back to the land. And here on this map, you can see where Barichara is located. And we're just a little bit north of the Amazon. On the western side of the Amazon is to our east and to our south. And we're in a section of the Andes that has 3 parallel mountain ranges. And we're in between the middle one and the one on the left. And so zooming in a little bit, this is what we're going to talk about, is how to regenerate an entire territory that is, I think in this image, we're probably looking at something like, I don't know if this is 500,000 hectares or, 50,000 square kilometers, something like that is what I'm showing in the satellite image, is the scale of regeneration that we're looking at because of the weather systems in the mountain ranges that are involved. And so we're going to be talking about how to regenerate something at this massive scale. So the complexities can be overwhelming at times, but just wait until you see the concrete actions that make it possible to think at this scale. Before we get into that, though, I want to tell you a little bit of the story of this place. Just this is a place, like most places before colonialism, it's a place that had indigenous culture. The people living here were called the Guane people. And these people have an amazing story because they were never conquered. They actually were driven to extinction. And they created some of the fiercest resistance to the conquistadors in all of this region in Colombia. And I don't know if it's true for all of South America, but at least in this region of the northern Andes, the Guane people were famous for their fierce resistance, and other peoples like the Muisca are another tribal network to the south of here. Many of them came to the Guane for refuge because the Guane were so strong at fighting against the conquistadors. And when they got to the point where the Guane would either surrender or die, some of their leaders actually chose to jump off of a cliff rather than be enslaved by colonialism. And so these people have a tremendous spirit and energy that can still be felt in some of the campesino culture here. And if you listen closely, you can feel it in the land. This is very powerful, sacred land. After the Guane people were destroyed and driven to extinction, plantations were set up, the land was privatized, the forests of the region were cut down, and now, as we're about to see, the land is in the process of becoming a desert. So when we talk about regeneration, we're really talking about bringing back the capacity of life for this landscape during the time of the Guane. We want to experience what would it be like for this land to become indigenous again when the indigenous were destroyed. And so there is a cultural regeneration, a spiritual regeneration and economic regeneration, and also the ecological regeneration, which is most of what we'll talk about today. So this is our backstory for the work that I'll present now. Another thing to know is that even though the Guane were driven to extinction, the culture of this region has remained very strong and rich, in part because of the shape of the mountains. The mountains here are very difficult to cross. And so before there was fossil fuel usage to build paved highways, it was very difficult to get into this region of the mountains. So there's a very strong local craft culture of earthen construction, basket weaving, and other things that you can still experience. And that has made Barichara both recognized as a national monument in Colombia and also as a tourist destination, mostly for Colombians and to a lesser extent internationally. But this is a tourist destination because it's such a peaceful and beautiful place, and because the local craft culture is so rich and so beautiful. At the same time, ecologically, this place is what is called a tropical dry forest and an ecological corridor that migratory species like birds and mammals cross from one region to another during the rainy season. But this forest is 98% deforested. So a lot of those local species have been destroyed. A lot of these ecological connections have been severed. And there's a desperate need to bring the forest back. So we have this blend of strong local culture, strong historical ecology, significant degradation of land, but because of the preservation of culture, quite a lot of capacity for regeneration. Another thing I want to say is in our present context of the pandemic due to the COVID virus, we have a very interesting situation. For one thing, even to this day, there are 0 cases of the virus in Barichara, mostly because we are remote and separate from the big cities. The nearest airport is 4 hours away in Bucaramanga, and it's 7 or 8 hours by bus to get to Bogota, which is the main city of Colombia. And this town has a large tourist economy. So when they locked down due to the virus, 80% of the local economy disappeared in a week back in March. So the economy has been collapsed for several months. Interestingly, though, we're almost out of water even without the tourists. So if the tourists came here, there would have been more demand for water and we would have even less. And the river, Rio Barichara, which has reservoirs set up for pulling water out of the river for 3 towns, the towns of Barichara, Cabrera, and Villanueva. All 3 reservoirs are almost empty, and there's only 3 months of water remaining. So instead of seeing this in a negative light, think about it as the system here is broken enough that it can be transformed. This region is poised for transformation of its economy and transformation of its infrastructure by simply making some changes in mindset and then shifting the focus of priorities. And so this is an amazing moment to imagine what is possible for a place that is on the edge of its old model being completely dead. And very few prospects of that tourism coming back, at least within the next year. And due to larger global patterns, we don't know if it will ever come back in the way that it was before. And of course, the problems dealing with water are only made worse if the old tourism model is kept. So we have a contradiction between these things that the community of Barichara and the surrounding region are going to need to grapple with over the next few years. So now let's start to look more at the landscape to see how we can imagine the regeneration of this place. First, if you look in the upper left, you can see a plateau that has Barichara on the left. The city of San Gil is kind of in the lower right part of the image, and it's zoomed out from this larger landscape of the mountains. And the plateau, which is nearly completely deforested, is roughly 50,000 hectares or 500 square kilometers in area. The reason I'm showing the larger scale is that this mountain range to the west is what blocks the air from coming in, and it creates a humid tropical rainforest to the west of the mountains, but becomes a dam that stops all the moisture from getting to the plateau east of the mountain range. So all of the air has to come in from the south, coming in from the south of that mountain range and entering into this triangular shaped area where the mountains are turning. And this shape is going to be very important for thinking about our work on regeneration. If we zoom in to the edge of the plateau where the town of Barichara is located, there are two things to know. One is the town itself is sitting up on the edge of this plateau with a river valley down below. This river you can see in the bottom left is Rio Suarez, and it's a very long river running from the south, very close to Bogota, going north until it drains into the Caribbean as part of a larger drainage basin of the entire Andes in this region. But within Barichara, as you can see in the upper left, colored in this orangish brown color, is Bioparque Moncora, which is a community food forest, 6.5 hectares of land, and it's owned by a local association. So there are 40 families in Barichara that own this association, and they've recently made it their #1 priority to develop and biopark. So this is a reforestation project. It's about 10 years old, led by 2 elder women in the community named Camila and Vicky, who are wonderful people in the town that are highly respected. And we have this community food forest as a demonstration and as an education site for teaching reforestation. We also should keep in mind that there are a lot of groups that are aligned and doing work already around water security, solidarity of food and food security, and ecological restoration that are poised to collaborate at larger scales. I want to share something with you that might sound surprising or maybe even a little scary, because mostly when we talk about human-caused climate change, we think of it as negative. But what I want to show in the next few minutes is that it is possible to design changes in the climate for an entire region, and that this can be a good thing. That we can actually understand the climate of a region and regenerate the entire weather system. And in this case, we're talking about a dry forest ecosystem that is becoming desert. And if we want to take it from desert back to dry forest, then we are actively designing climate change, because those are definitions of landscape defined in part by climate. So we're going to talk about how to intentionally change climate for the better, which is maybe a controversial idea, but I think you'll begin to see how powerful it is. Here's how I want you to think about it. On this plateau, as you can see by the brown and yellow color of the plateau, that it is almost entirely deprived of forest, because there were tobacco plantations and smallholder farms with growing corn and monoculture crops, and then later cows and goats, all of which further degraded the land, turning this plateau into hard-packed clay that is hot and dry like cement, because we are almost exactly at the equator. We're 1 degree north of the equator in the tropics. So when you have a high plateau covered with hard-packed clay, what happens is it turns into concrete. And this creates something that climate scientists call the heat island effect, which is that over this plateau during the day, when the sun hits it, it turns into a baking stone and hot, dry air begins to rise. But because of that shape of the mountain ranges that I mentioned before, as the air comes in bringing moisture, it creates a circulation, a rotation around the plateau. So at any time, if you're on the plateau, you look at the sky like I'm doing right now, you will see blue sky above you. But all around us in 360 degrees are clouds, and often it's raining to the west, to the south, to the east, and to the north. The reason for this is that all of that moist air is able to make rain, but it cannot penetrate and enter the plateau, because the plateau has this cushion of hot, dry air that as the clouds start to move in, they evaporate. So the deforestation of the plateau is what keeps the clouds from getting in. And this is why the plateau is becoming a desert, because the forest was removed, and this had 2 effects. It removed a lot of the moisture from the ground, and it also created this heat island effect that keeps the rain from getting in. So what we want to think about is, how can we build a connection from the edge of the plateau where there's rain to bring the moisture onto the plateau. And I'm going to show you two places where we can strategically intervene to begin to transform this pattern. One of them is right here. So this is the first strategic focus of landscape regeneration in Barichara. There are many of them. This isn't meant to be number one as it's the first thing we do. It's just the first one that I'm showing in our presentation today. But here in this circle, just below the plateau, is a place where we can try to bring moisture back into the plateau. And here's how it works. If you stand in that food forest at the top of Barichara, like I did when I took these pictures, you'll see Rio Suarez, the river, down below. Often in the morning, you'll see what's happening in this picture, which is that clouds form over the cold air above the river. And those clouds begin to rise and move away from the river, coming toward the plateau. As they do, they become fog that is moving along the ground. And if that fog gets to the cliff, it rises up and brings moisture that condenses onto the leaves of plants, onto the trees, the bushes, and the grass. But unfortunately, often what happens is right in the middle of this area, there is a place that is so dry that as the fog and clouds move in, they evaporate and this moisture doesn't arrive. Here is the place where it happens. This relatively flat area, a mesa on the land below, that's about 50 hectares in size. It's only owned by a handful of families. And this is the place where this formation of clouds gets dried out and it doesn't arrive up above on the plateau where Barichara is located. So if there was a way to complete this connection, stop the evaporation of clouds, we would get more moisture throughout the year. Here's the same piece of land viewed from above in a photograph that I took. Now what's interesting is if you look at this picture, you can see that there are some trees there, but there's a lot of barren earth. The barren earth is hard-packed clay. The reason it's hard-packed clay is because there are cows and goats, which were not historically in this region. And when the farmers are raising those animals, they eat the bushes and the grasses and leave the exposed ground. What's interesting is to imagine a network of solidarity, because during the COVID crisis, when the economy collapsed, I've walked and biked in this area, and you'll see a lot of these farms are for sale. But because the economy collapsed, no one is buying them. So imagine this scenario. Imagine that if these farmers, instead of selling their land to outsiders, came together and created a cooperative where they could make money or get other economic benefits by reforesting their land. If they did this, they would complete a connection of forest that is holding moisture in the cycling of the canopy of the trees to allow fog and clouds to bring much needed moisture to the plateau above. So this is a real possibility that could be enacted in the next 2 to 3 years. And it's poised to happen now as these owners of the fincas are all struggling to survive in the middle of an economic crisis. Now, our second strategic focus that I want to draw attention to has to do with aquifers, water that drains into the ground and runs through the channel of rock like an underground river. Here you can see I've drawn lines for the main river on the plateau, which is called Rio Barichara, or Barichara River. And I've drawn lines for all of the tributaries that drain into the river. The arrow is pointing at a ridge line that goes from near the town of Villanueva down to Barichara. The highest point is up above, and the lowest point is to the left and below. What's interesting is that this is a place where historically there was an aquifer system, and people in the town of Barichara actually had wells in their houses where they could get groundwater, and that's how the people living here got their water for several hundred years. So here's the idea. If we begin to reforest this piece of land, then the plants themselves will dig roots into the ground and pump water downward, refilling the aquifers. And that water drains downhill under the ground to where the town of Barichara is located. This also creates a stronger connection to the reforestation on the mesa below, so that as moisture comes up onto the plateau in this same region, if we plant more trees, and you can see in the picture that the area where I have these arrows is heavily deforested at the moment. So if we plant trees here, we can accelerate the recharging or refilling of these aquifers. And this will start to bring moisture back into the plateau as well, connecting the rain that is not getting onto the plateau to bring it back in. So both of these projects are reforestation projects, growing trees, growing bushes, protecting the tropical dry forest, but they also are water security projects at exactly the same time. Now, what I want to point out is where these arrows end, the direction they're pointing, is they end exactly at Bioparque Mancora, the community food forest. So we can organize actions for both projects: education, training, mapping, progress reports, community events, celebrations for our successes. All of those things can be done in this food forest. So Mancora is a perfect intermediate location of these two strategic focus areas. Already you can see that if we were to do these two projects, we would change the climate of the landscape, and we would be designing to heal the land. Human-caused climate change for the better. Here's an interesting paradox, an irony of deserts all over the world. We don't have enough water. All of the reservoirs are within 3 months of being without water. Yet 2 weeks ago, I took this picture. During a very heavy rain, the streets in Barichara, which are cobblestone streets, were filled with water. Lakes like this one formed right next to my house. All of this water is not being harvested. Here's another picture where the streets become a river. Cobblestone does not absorb water very well when the stones have concrete between them. So what this tells us is, with intelligent rainwater harvesting at the town scale, if the entire town of Barichara was to create a rainwater harvesting system for the water that drains down the streets during a heavy rain, we could capture enough water to supply for most of the town's needs during the 8, 9, 10-month periods of dryness that now occur regularly due to the drying out of the climate. And what's really interesting about this is that most of this water comes from the roofs of the buildings and the cobblestone streets. This is a problem created by the town, and the solution can be created by the town too. So if we just think about the flow of water and how to redirect it into reservoirs, into aquifers, into usable potable forms or usable gray water systems, we have enough water from one event like this one. This event that happened about 2 weeks ago produced enough water for several months of usage in the town, but all of it was lost, draining into the valley below. And it's hard to see because this picture is at night, but that water is brown because it's also stealing all of the soil that we need to bring the forest back. Massive erosion is happening when the water moves this quickly. So we're losing soil and we're losing water by not having this rainwater harvesting system. But again, the problem is in the town, and there are a lot of very smart, educated, dedicated people living in Barichara who can create rainwater harvesting systems for exactly this kind of event. So this is strategic focus number 3, is turn the town into a rainwater harvesting system to catch water during major rain events. In the last few weeks during these rains, some of us have gathered to create Brigada del Agua, a water brigade, which is a training program of community members who want to help create retention systems. So what we've been doing is going into the Bioparque, into Mancora, and taking pickaxes and trowels and machete. Well, we haven't been using machetes yet, but we will soon. And we've been digging, going to places when it's raining and watching the water running downhill where there's erosion. And we dig small diversion channels like these, small retention holes, and then we watch the water as it's being absorbed into the land. But the idea behind this is to have 15 or 20 community members, maybe more, each of whom has their own tools. So everyone has a pickaxe. The idea is that each of them becomes a regenerative leader taking concrete actions. When it rains, any one of these people might grab their pickaxe, go outside, watch the rainwater running downhill, and dig a diversion channel. Because each of these projects that you see pictured here took less than an hour to dig. You can dig one of these diversion channels in 20 to 30 minutes. So if one person has a pickaxe, they can dig 2 of these in an hour. If 10 people have a pickaxe, there could be 20 dug in 1 hour during a rain event. Also, we see this as a way of activating and cultivating leadership for the landscape scale projects needed later on, when we're going to need these same people to train others when we have hundreds or 1,000 people all building water retention systems together across the entire plateau. So this Brigado del Agua is another focus area for using the need of water retention to cultivate community capacities for activation. Another thing that happened during the crisis after COVID, when the economy collapsed, was a solidarity food network was created. In most places, we call this community-supported agriculture, direct buying from farmers. But in this case, what happened was there were 10 farms, or fincas as they're called here, that were already organized. And they started creating a weekly canasta, a weekly basket of food that community members could buy directly from the farmers, organized by some local community organizers. And in this case, what's really important is having the economy work while we do the regenerative work, and making the economy based on solidarity relationships between the people living here, so that we don't have to depend on tourism from the outside. So these are 2 strategic capacities that enable regeneration to happen during the periods of disruption that are ahead, as well as the ones that are happening right now. What's interesting is this place has a lot of indigenous food practices that are already here. And so there are people engaging in local education efforts to preserve them. Just earlier this week, my wife helped a local woman named Margarita to organize a workshop to teach how to use this breadfruit that was found on a finca nearby, to teach people how to harvest plants that are grown in the region and use them in a variety of ways. Here, the strategic focus is on building knowledge and distributing practices about how to use local native plants. This creates solidarity among campesinos and resilience among families through cooking food and through feeding our families. And this is an important piece that weaves across all of the ecological regeneration that needs to be done. What's interesting is that the Solidarity Food Network and these ways of sharing knowledge about food production build upon previous frameworks of cooperation that already exist. Here I'm showing Humano Coffee, which is a project, it's a cooperative of about 10 fincas. So there are 10 campesino farms, all of them in the Santa Elena region, which is on the plateau, that had already formed a relationship around growing coffee. Interestingly, the Solidarity Food Network of weekly food baskets was activated by reaching out to these same farmers because they had already been organized as a cooperative. So here we see an example of cooperative coffee production to sell a really delicious coffee. We use this in our house and we love it. This coffee is wonderful. But at the same time, they created relationships and trust between farmers that could transition their focus to becoming primary food producers for the community when outside transport was shut down and when people didn't have as much money to buy food. So here's an example where cooperative relationships and neighbors knowing each other is a critical capacity of regeneration for building the economy of exchange, enabling ecological restoration to occur. Another key focus area that my family is involved in, and many of you know about from previous webinars, because we have a 3-year-old daughter that participates in all of this, is regenerative education. Here is something very interesting, that regenerative education is focused on the children. How do the children learn how to construct houses with natural fibers and local building materials? How do they identify native plants? How do they engage in reforestation? How do they participate in water retention? But we're doing this in a way that the parents are getting involved, because many of the parents also need to learn this. So we're really looking at entire family systems, how to educate all of us to do this. So my wife and I are learning a lot about how to do this by joining the children as they learn how to do it. And as a result, we start doing projects that become learning opportunities for our own children. So this focus on regenerative education is sort of the dynamic driver of evolution for the entire system. All of the other strategic focus areas are accelerated, accentuated, and initiated by education. So education is the lifeblood of the entire process. And because we have so much to learn and local people have so much to teach, that just by having projects and giving workshops, we can share ancestral knowledge. These baskets are made by a group of women that live in Barichara, and they're famous all over Colombia. Tourists come here and buy these baskets because they're so beautiful and they function so well. But we can have every member of the community learn how to use them or make them. Similarly, there's a lot of local craft skills, as I mentioned before, and now increasingly a lot of permaculture training that's going on. And notice in the picture, while the adults are learning permaculture, the children are too, which is a critical insight and I think an innovation of what's happening here in Barichara that others can learn from. Something else that's really distinctive about this place and that each place needs to find for themselves is what kind of infrastructure exists that does not depend on the outside world. So before there were fossil fuels, the people living here had built a network of stone walking paths. They're called the Caminos Reales, or the Royal Roads is the way it's translated to English, even though Camino Real means real walk or real path. But these were indigenous transport networks between villages that still exist and that are used today by tourists and by local people walking between the villages. What's amazing about this is that we have existing indigenous infrastructure that we can use to build the economy. So let's say that there are no longer fossil fuels because the global economy collapses, a very real possibility in the next 10 years and an inevitability in the next decade or two. That this is a place that can depend upon this infrastructure. And this infrastructure becomes not only a pathway of circulation and flow for transport and knowledge, but it also becomes an educational pathway. As you walk these paths, you learn the land. And as you learn the land, you can become a regenerator of the land. So this regenerative infrastructure is really important for the work that's happening here. To begin to summarize, what you can see is that we're organizing this design thinking around the landscape itself. By thinking in this way, we can start to see that there are lots of different activities, but they're related to each other because the landscape has functions: drainage of water, forest canopies, cycling water through what's called evapotranspiration, aquifer systems, trade networks of food, material flows for construction, weaving baskets, clothing, and so on. But all of these are organized by the land. So if we start to look at the things that I've been talking about, you can see that there are reforestation efforts and education, the recharging of aquifers, a forest school, Escuela Bosque for children, how to increase cloud formation by planting trees to bring the rain back to the plateau, networks of solidarity among fincas, the farms in the region working together, and various water retention projects and reforestation projects across the landscape. When we think in this way, it becomes possible to regenerate an entire territory and build a bioregional economy that is entirely regenerative. Now I want to step back for a moment and say something that's really scary, but that we need to keep in mind. Scientists who study the Amazon basin, the entire network of rivers for the Amazon, know that it is on the edge of collapse due to a combination of deforestation, the loss of surface area of forest, just like we saw on the plateau for Barichara, how it's causing the desert to form, that as they're deforesting the Amazon, it's affecting the movement of water. That together with fragmentation, where the forest used to be completely connected across the land, but now is fragmented into plots. We're going to move across a tipping point somewhere between 2022 and 2024, so in the next few years, where the entire hydrological pump of the Amazon will shut down. When this happens, the Amazon will unravel, global climate will change, and regional climate all over the world will become more turbulent. At this point in time, there's so much momentum and energy driving this deforestation that it's effectively impossible to stop it. So we have to prepare for the collapse of the Amazon. So how can we in Barichara do this regenerative work when the larger continent is about to be thrown into chaos? The answer is we can't do this on our own. No single bioregion works without collaborating with others. So what we need to do is build a network of partner bioregions across all of South America to be able to stabilize our own climate around the plateau of Barichara. Now, the Earth Regenerator Study Group is helping us to do this, but I just wanted to stress this because as you look at how much complexity is involved in regenerating a landscape, as you zoom out to the planetary scale, it can feel overwhelming, except that each of us can do this work in our own bioregion, and then we can form partnerships with other bioregions to coordinate efforts together. And here we have two major organizing dynamics. One is the drainage basin of the Amazon itself, which covers something like 40% of South America. And the other is the Andes, which is one of the largest mountain ranges on Earth, spanning all the way from the northern to the southern tips of South America. So if we can organize bioregional collaboration across all of the Andes and across all of the Amazon, then we can stabilize the regenerative plan or regenerative efforts of the entire continent. The same is true of other continents as well, but I just want to give you the sense that as complex as this sounds, it really can be done. Now, for my part, and what I'm doing with these webinars and with the Earth Regenerator Study Group, is we are learning how to co-create these local efforts so that regeneration of landscapes and economies into these bioregional scales can be done everywhere on Earth. And because my family has decided to live in Barichara and raise our daughter here, we want to help enact the story that I've just told you. We want our daughter to grow up regenerating this bioregion with all of the people here. That we're in the process of creating a design school that will focus on planetary scale regeneration by teaching bioregional design so that people all over the world can come to Barichara and learn from the things I've just been sharing. How do you build a solidarity food network? How do you identify locations on the land for preserving and retaining water? What are the aspects of the local infrastructure or the indigenous knowledge that enable the regeneration of land? And so on. There are many questions like this. And with the Design Institute for Regenerating Earth, which is now located in Barichara, and with the Earth Regenerator Study Group, we're coordinating this design as a learning process to share with everyone. So after it becomes possible to travel again, we will start inviting people from around the world to come to Barichara to study, to learn, and to teach with us. But we'll also be building relationships with other bioregions across the Andes and the Amazon to do our work in a coordinated fashion. Now I want to start to come to a close of the presentation with two quotes that I think sort of reinforce what I'm saying. One of them comes from James Lovelock, a creator of the Gaia hypothesis. James Lovelock said, "The entire range of living matter on Earth, from whales to viruses, and from oaks to algae, could be regarded as constituting a single living entity, the biosphere, capable of manipulating the Earth's atmosphere by regulating carbon dioxide to suit its overall needs. And this entire living entity is endowed with the faculties and powers far beyond those of its constituent parts." So if we human beings start to become the living, conscious embodiment of Gaia, then we become the living entity, the conscious tapestry of landscape that can direct the Earth's atmosphere and its ecological functions to suit the overall needs of the land, which is what indigenous cultures all over the world have done for thousands of years. So this is what I've been describing in Barichara, is how humans can do this with intentional regenerative design. The other quote I want to share is from David Sloan Wilson, an evolutionary biologist, who says that we need to become wise managers of our own evolutionary process. As I've stressed in previous webinars, it is the evolution of human culture that has degraded and destroyed most landscapes on Earth. So it is the evolution of human culture that will regenerate landscapes and enable humans to avoid extinction. So if we are to become wise managers of the evolutionary process, we have to become regenerative designers of regional climate, of regional landscapes, and of regional economies. And then to close, this regeneration at territorial scales, as complex as it may feel, it absolutely can be done. And in fact, it is being done right now in many places around the world. So with that said, I'll end the presentation portion, and I'd love to begin our conversation. So thank you everyone for listening into this part of the discussion. I'm really excited to have the discussion portion of this conversation. I'm already seeing in the comment thread that there's the thing about the Al-Baida project in Saudi Arabia led by Neil Spackman, which there's a video of in the Earth Regenerator Study Group showing how powerful this is. And we have a collection of videos showcasing a lot of this. I see Judith has shared Brad Lancaster's website of, as you see, the chat box is fantastic for collaborative learning in parallel with the presentation. So thank you all for starting that. What I'd like to invite now is more of an interactive discussion. And as I said, if you have questions, go to Ask a Question, the button at the bottom, and start to write down questions and vote for the questions you'd most like to hear. And I will start with the questions that have the most votes. And then we'll just go through and start to have a discussion. And what's lovely is the question that has the most votes is from a person living in the community. So it's Gloria who's asked a question. Gloria, if you haven't participated before, I'm going to invite you into to share your screen on video if you're able to do so. If you're not able to do so, just cancel the invite and then drop a note into the chat box. But if you are able to join me, I'd love to discuss your question together. And so the question from Gloria, looks like it's not letting me invite you in, or maybe there's just a time delay. But the question is, what types of trees are needed for reforestation, and how many years do you estimate would it take to have the results proposed? I know there's been a time lag with my computer in the last webinar, so if that's happening now, that might be why Gloria is not joining me, is that I'm not seeing that feedback. But Gloria, I hope you are able to come and join me. And I'll start by saying that there is a group of people here in Barichara who are already leading reforestation efforts, who have been mapping out some of these native species. I believe Gloria knows about some of this work. And what I've seen is that in 3 to 5 years, you can transform a landscape with respect to water by having a very well-designed watershed management system. And with agroforestry projects, you can begin to change a landscape with trees in 5 to 10 years. So what I think is by 10 years from now, we could completely transform this landscape. Now, to bring back the native forest is going to take longer. It might take something like 30 years to get it established enough that it can maintain itself to completely restabilize the forest. And it might be 200 years before it achieves what ecologists call climax scale regeneration of the ecosystem. So that's multiple generations. But the kind of regenerative work we're talking about to stop becoming a desert and to rebuild the forest, 5 to 10 years, we could transform this landscape. And there are video examples of this, like the one in Saudi Arabia that was mentioned in the chat box. And so, Gloria, I don't know if you're able to join me or not, but I really hope that you're able to. And if you're not able to join me, then we'll just continue. We've had technical difficulties with people joining in the past, so that may be what's happening. Oh, no, here you are. Okay, hi, Gloria.
Hi, thanks for responding my questions. I appreciate that.
Yeah, is there anything you would like to share about your reaction to the presentation as someone who has lived here a lot longer than I have? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, I am from Santander, which is the department where Barichara is located. And I am very interested in learning and joining, this effort of Joe's to understand better where we live and the resources that we have and how we have used them in the, during our history, I would say. And it's very important, your introduction about where Barichara comes from and how we are. So as regards to natural resources, I think it's very important that we all learn about it. So in my case, I think it's a great opportunity to think long-term. What are we doing right now? Like some of the examples you gave, how do we manage water? We go to long dry seasons, but there is plenty of rainy water when it rains. So how do we manage water? The soil, the history of the soil, which is very tied to the economic development of the region. So there are many issues that that you have been able to do something about it and to have a proposal. So I think the fact that you have made an effort with other people here in town, like the people who work on the Moncora Biopark, which is part of the Association of Friends of Barichara. We are people who are, Baricharas ever. So I think all of joining efforts and trying to do something is very important. And I do appreciate the fact that you're taking, what can we learn here in Barichara that we can share with other parts of the world, and what is our responsibility to take care of resources. So I really want to support your work and to be able to, like I say, learn and I appreciate all the community and the people from all over the world that are more aware of Barichara. And I think it's, like you said, it would be great for all of us to learn. So if we have something to share, I think that's great. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Joe. Uh-huh.
Oh, of course. No, muchas gracias a ti, Gloria. Okay. It's really a gift to be here, for our family to come. For those who don't know, the Bioparque was created because there was a man living here who convinced this association to create a green belt around the city. And then he convinced them not to turn this land into housing development and instead start reforestation. And then here's the powerful thing. He very promptly became sick and he died. So his wife and another woman who became a widow around the same time became the stewards of the land, but they did not know how to reforest it. So there's this powerful transformation around the spirit being given by this amazing leader, this man named Alfonso, who I never got to meet, of course, because I've only been here for 6 months. And now the other thing is that this place was a place of ritual and ceremony of the Guane. They didn't live here on the plateau. They would come up here to have ceremonies and rituals. So this is sacred land of the indigenous people. So something so beautiful about what's happening there. And you can feel it when you walk on the trails in that place. So Gloria, for me, it's just such a gift to be able to step on this path with you and walk together.
Thank you. Uh-huh.
Gracias, Gloria. Let's continue to the next questions in this discussion. I see that Patty has asked a question. So Patty, I'll invite you into the screen to share discussion with me. This question is, how do you implement this scale of regeneration with complicated regulatory frameworks? This is such an important question. Oh my goodness. I want to start by explaining something that was an insight I learned from a friend who studies systemic risk, my friend Jordan Greenhall. And he was looking at patterns of connectivity in the globalized economy. And what we see with COVID is that, hi, Patty, welcome. Great to have you here.
Hi, Jordan.
Yeah, I want to start this conversation by sharing something I learned from my friend Jordan Greenhall, which is that if you are too entrenched within the dominant system, then the dominant system will take you down with it.
Yeah.
We see this with COVID, right? That if you're in a big city with multinational airports, that it just locks the whole thing down. Here we are 4 hours away from an international airport, so we can do this work. There's also the double-edged sword that we're in a place where development of the houses in the plateau is illegal, but it's not enforced. Mm-hmm. So there's not enough institutional power to stop people from doing things, which is exactly why we have the power to do regeneration if we choose to.
Yes.
So you see the paradox in this. But I'd love to hear more of your thinking about the question and maybe what motivated it. What do you, your experience and frustration perhaps, or what are you thinking here?
So I come from India, and we have a couple of farms there where we would like to do this kind of thing. And in India, of course, the regulatory frameworks are much smaller. But I live in the UK now, but at some point we'd like to go back to India. And I was just wondering if we could do similar things while I'm here in the UK, but apparently it's impossible because there's this whole interwoven network of NGOs, governmental bodies, everything, blah, 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 and it's almost impossible to do it, right? So that was what prompted me the question. And the other motivation was, if we want to really heal the planet, we have to focus not just on areas where there is little bit of regulation, but also in areas where there is a lot of regulatory bottlenecks.
Yeah,
Otherwise, you'll have this imbalance in terms of earth regeneration. Yeah,
yeah.
that was my motive.
One thing I think is really it's a sobering fact. It's one of those facts that could traumatize a person, is that much of the regenerative work cannot happen until globalized civilization collapses.
Mhm.
And that's because of exactly the problem you're describing. We're so entrenched in these systems that we can't do what's needed. So what we have to do is think in terms of biomimicry. How do we compost the death and decay of those structures? How do we turn them into regeneration? And that is something I can say very easily, but the reality is very painful.
Mhm.
And part of the reason my family is in the Northern Andes, away from the United States where I grew up, is because we moved away from an entrenched system. And eventually, after some trial and error, found a place where we could participate at this scale.
Mhm.
So I think that part of this is those of us who want to devote our lives to this work, how can we move to where it's most powerful to create the demonstrations at scale that everyone else can learn from?
Yeah.
And if so, like an example is Jeff Lawton has been famous for a project in Jordan to green the desert, or the Los Plateau in China, where John Liu made a documentary to show that 100,000 hectares of land they regenerated in 15 years. So those demonstrations are really important. What we're doing now is showing how to build bioregional economies.
Mhm.
And so here in Barichara, I think we have more strength in doing it because we're so remote in the mountains.
Yes.
And the landscape, the geography largely determines this possibility. It excludes globalization.
Yes.
Globalization has had a hard time destroying this place, even though it's tried very hard for 500 years. And so it's a paradox of
Mhm.
how to do this. But I think it just shows us how important it is to understand the difficulties involved. And at the
Mhm.
same time, as Lucy is saying in the chat box, Extinction Rebellion is an example. The
Yes.
climate emergency, which has been a frame promoted by the Club of Rome that a lot of places have adopted, is another example where the discourse is shifting, but the infrastructure can't change fast enough.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so we're still going to find a lot of frustration in those movements. And for some time to come, this is the rest of our lives. It's all of this work. But I really appreciate your question. Is there anything else you'd like to add to it before we move to the next question?
No. I think that was it. Thanks so much, Rob, for your time and
Beautiful.
for your efforts as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This question is super important because one thing we have to learn how to let go is we have to let go of what's not going to work and then know how to find what will work, which is really important. So I see the next question is by Jem Bledsoe, who's an old friend, actually. I met Jem in Eugene, Oregon a couple years ago, 2 years ago. Jem, if you're available, I'm inviting you onto the screen. And Jem is actually posting something that he gave me a wonderful book as a gift while he was bike touring and living in Eugene. It helped me answer this question that he's asking. So Jem, I'm going to partly answer this by talking about James Scott's work, which I think is where you're going to go too. But first, it's lovely to see you. How are you?
Yeah, well, thank you.
Is that what you're thinking of as things like James Scott's work, or are you looking more on the solution side? Tell me more about this.
I'm not sure. I'm not James Scott. That's a new word name for me. Alan Savory, his work, where he shows the systematic, holistic grazing management allows for the animals to eat the grasses, but only a little bit of them, and their composted remains actually go into the soil and ignite a bunch of insect life and other things. And over a relatively short period of time, the grasses are reestablished, and you set the conditions for succession to occur. And it also melds with the current use and the current understanding of the people who are there trying to make their living with the animals so that you're not like just disrupting them. And it gives time for the soil to become reinvigorated and room for the trees and whatnot that will come a little bit later to actually have a chance of rooting and carrying on. So it's a way of integrating with the process then and going with it.
Yeah, so two things about this. One is, this is really important, what you're saying. And there are two names given to it. It's holistic management is what the Savory Institute calls it.
Yeah.
And there's biodynamic farming, which is more of a descriptive term to get at something very similar. Just basically managing the dynamic patterns of living systems, including animals, which I think is very important and is important to connect to the type of landscape. One of the problems here in Barichara is that there are grazing animals that are destroying the soil because historically there were not grazing animal patterns here. And so the goats that are here are actually a problem, at least in the way they're currently being managed. So it's an interesting question of how to find that insight, because it's still absolutely correct. What you're saying is absolutely correct. It's just that doing it is also about appropriate ecological dynamic patterns for each place. And as Tara's saying in the chat box, James Scott's work, the book Against the Grain, which I highly recommend, tells the story that agriculture depended upon the domestication, enslavement of two different kinds of animals. Domesticated non-human animals as livestock and humans as slaves. And one of the examples of the Great Wall of China, it's now known, was not simply built to keep invaders out, but to keep enslaved laborers in. And so there's a really interesting insight about agricultural systems and economic enslavement. And a lot of what we're talking about with these solidarity networks is regenerating human freedom while at the same time creating participation and freedom of animal movement, like in the Savory method. And then the ecological connections of migratory species and biodiversity, that all of these are part of the same way of thinking, which is super, super valuable. So I see this as like a way of thinking about ethics, a way of thinking about management, and a way of thinking about ecosystems all blended together that just works beautifully. So we should be doing it. Yeah. Is there anything more you want to share about it?
Just to, in the interim between being asked to join the chat and the blank screen that I saw and whatnot, and then you continuing to talk and things, I think that's that point that you mentioned the James Scott book and Against the Grain. And I gave you that book. So yeah, I know that book, but I'd forgotten the author's name. So yeah. It's a fantastic book. And so it's sort of my way of saying, thank you for sharing it with me. I definitely read it and completely absorbed its message. Yeah. And thank you, Tara, for dropping in some things in the chat box. Because this it's brilliant, wonderful stuff.
Important. Cool. And lovely to see you again, my friend.
You too. Yeah, this is great. Awesome. Great. I'm actually very much. We'll talk on Facebook and stuff because I got more stuff to tell you. But yeah,
wonderful. Thanks. All right. Talk to you soon. Buddy, we met James because he was bike touring and living on his bike for a little while in Eugene, and my wife and I do bike touring, so we found a kindred spirit pretty much right away. So I see the next question coming from PJ. And this question, I'm inviting you into the screen, is if you suddenly had a relatively large funder come to you and wanted to give you money to help your effort, how would you approach that conversation? Is that money useful at this point? If so, how would you deploy it? I'm looking forward to having you come to share thinking on this, because my initial reaction is, I want to create a wall that keeps all that money out. I don't want to contaminate the community process that's happening here with the power inequality of money. And so just to personalize this, because this is such an important topic, this is huge, is my wife and I, we live off of Patreon. And if I was in the US, my Patreon would not pay for us to live. Living in Barichara, we make more money than we need here. And so it's just because of the structural inequality of the world. And what we found is that if we started giving that money to people here, even like 100 US dollars in a month, that we would create this contamination of relationships. And so it's very, very delicate what happens with money. And so if someone came to me and said, I have like $10 million to give into your project, it's awesome, I would say, no, thank you. The people of Barichara can do it without your money. Because I wouldn't want to contaminate those relationships. But I want to talk more about this because there are a lot of sides to this. I'd love to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah, I guess it was more because I've heard you say about this paradox, right, of that finance is going to wake up in terms of wanting to help. I mean, you've already seen BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, has said we're starting to switch on to these things. Whether it's ESG, it'll take them a while to actually get there, but when they get there, there is going to be a absolute fire hose of money looking to fund projects that look like this or that want to get into this area. And the paradox is, do you even need it? Should you even have it? And if so, would you even be able to handle it? And so I guess I was just thinking where you're at in the thinking on that, because that's where I'm trying to figure out, because coming from that world, like how do I and being in the MBA space, which is training these, unfortunately, to go into more the corporate high level finance areas. So
yeah, one of the things we talked about in the discussion of the Earth Regeneration Fund was how to separate land from markets so that the market cannot do what markets do on the land. Markets can work, but they actually don't work for land. They destroy land for interesting historical reasons. And so one idea, if there's a lot of money, is to use the money to buy the land, but to buy the land in order to create cooperatives. It's like creating a regenerative land grab instead of a privatization land grab. So those 50 hectares of land on the mesa down below, where all of them are for sale right now, what I would love to do is go and talk to the owners of those farms and say, what do you need to be able to live here for the next 10 years where you have dignity and respect, but money is not a problem? You don't depend on the outside economy. And could I bring you a pattern? Could I bring you a cooperation, a way of relating to each other, where we might buy the land, instead of buying it from you, we buy it with you? So let's say there are 5 farms. So we're going to come in with some money, but instead of buying the 5 farms from them, we buy the 5 farms with them, which means there are going to be restrictions on the land now. They might have to stop using goats and cows the way that they are now, but they will then get paid to do reforestation because it's carbon offsets, it's water retention, and it's eventually agroforestry with products to give into the economy. And it's also an educational space. So some of the money could also be used to educate those farmers or other people coming to do regenerative work on that land. But you can already see, like, in a place like this, to bring money leverages so much power and inequality that we would have, what we really would need is to organize the community around how they can function as a cooperative so that that group is strong enough to discuss whether they want money or not, without the money fragmenting them against each other. Okay. And so it's sort of like we create community capital. We leverage the community capital into land capital if there's money, or if we don't need it because the community does it together. And then we build regenerative models of economic flow on the land, as we talked about in the Earth Regeneration Fund. And then this becomes the portfolios for investing, and the community land banks are built on this. And if someone wants to come in and bring money, the money can be used for protecting the land from the market, keeping local people involved in the local economy, creating educational opportunities to maintain local knowledge, and building these regenerative practices. Because for these demonstrations, some outside money is going to be useful. But as I'm learning as an outsider who's becoming a community member, and I'm it's a gradual and delicate process. My skin is always going to be a little too white to be a local. Everyone's going to know I'm from somewhere else. That I have to treat this power relationship with great respect. And so I think that until you live in a place like this to learn the delicateness, which I don't fully know, I'm still learning it, money is really dangerous because it's got a shadow. But if you can bring all of the relationships of money into the light, then the shadow can be dealt with. Anything else you think or react to this? Because I know you're really exploring this a lot. Like, how does this land for you?
Yeah. Well, what comes to light for me is it actually helps, I think, to direct my study and sort of solidify something I've been thinking, which is we need to be able to show people who don't understand anything besides profit over everything how their financial capital can be turned into tangibly other capitals, and the benefits, and being able to show that relationship, I think, will help the efforts and really illuminate that this is just like, this is the dangers of what focusing purely on money and finance and the profit over everything, what that can do. It can destroy all of the other capitals. And so helping transition that. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, no, it's a super important question. So thank you for asking it. And as Gloria said in her comment, there are already some cooperatives here. But as someone that's new, I'm not connected to them. So it's like, I will gradually become more aware of them. And people here, of course, know about them. But if there was anyone who came with large amounts of money, it's really a question of how to build trust between the people, the individual people who are leveraging those relationships. And just as one really specific example, I happen to be related to the director of Common Lands Foundation, which manages 1 million hectare regeneration projects. And they're interested in doing work in Colombia. And that director, his name's Willem Ferwada, loves Barichara and has been here before. So we might end up in a relationship where that foundation wants to do work here. And I would want to very delicately build a relationship between them and local community leaders before any talk about money, whether they have money or not, because the trust and the relationships is what everything flows from. Because that's what's often missed by these discussions of money. But yeah, it's a super, super important question. I see that now we have 2 questions with the same number of votes. Bo, I'm going to start with your question, and then we'll probably go to Rachel's after that. So I'll invite you onto the screen. And the question that you're asking is, there's an R3.0 initiative that is renovating fiduciary rules. Is it of use to regeneration, or will it be of use someday later? I happen to be involved in this. For those you don't know, this is the Sustainable Finance Blueprint being created by R3.0, and I'm a member of the working group. So I know that what they're doing is really valuable work. And I would say it is valuable for what we're doing now, but will be more useful after it's finished and people have learned how to use it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. Like, what do you know about it? And what would you share in reflecting on this question? You're here with me now.
You asking me what I want to share with you?
Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah.
I don't see the question row, but this 3R.0, I hit upon it a few days ago, and I saw that you were participating in one of the meetings, or at least I think I saw you. It was very quick.
Yes.
What they're doing can be very important for getting your kind of projects or our kind of projects financed. But how far along are they, and what are they doing? I cannot figure that one out. And you probably, since you're an insider, somewhat, you can probably enlighten us on it.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, R3.0 used to be called Reporting 3.0. They changed the name last year. I'm good friends with 2 of the lead people, Bill Bao and Ralph Thum. And they have been building a bridge between corporate sustainability, as it was understood in terms of reporting and accounting back in the late 1990s, up until the present, the accumulation of learning in this very complex space. And they've created a set of blueprints that map out an ecosystem to show what's needed to transform the system. The Sustainable Finance Blueprint is about how to transform finance in the relationship to a bunch of other things. One of the key things is a philosophical shift, as we were sort of talking about a moment ago, related to different kinds of capital and how to understand them. And what they're doing in this blueprint is creating a set of recommendations for how to think about finance differently. And so the report is in a public comment period that started yesterday, where they have 30 days of public comment. So if you want to learn about it and make contributions to its final version, it's a crowdsourcing ecosystem mapping effort that also connects together lead thinkers and practitioners doing work around the theme of sustainable finance. So what they're doing is building relationships with people through working groups to integrate knowledge into a coherent way of thinking, to try to influence those same thinkers and their practices with the learning that they did together. And the result is a blueprint that you can read and learn what they've learned. But more important than the blueprint is the learning process of all those people, which takes place over about a year. And so what I think is really powerful is how much they have emphasized bioregional regeneration as an understanding of how to change finance. That one of the problems with finance is that it's become globalized, which means it's disconnected from ecological context. You can leverage extraction from one place to move quote unquote wealth, destroy a forest, build houses. And this disconnect to land is a big problem with finance. There are a lot of other problems with finance. But if we make finance connected, if we connect it to landscape again, then finance becomes regenerative because it flows through living systems. And then there are larger scale living systems like the global climate system, or the global geochemical cycling of nitrogen, the carbon cycle, that can also be developed in this way, but we prototype them in bioregional economies and then build the global economy from them. And so I think it's extremely useful in this way and has a lot more insights than what I'm naming. But yeah, I think it's really important. Does that sort of make sense to you, Bo, or what do you think? Any other questions or comments about it?
What I think, we have a very big problem with CO2 and nitrogen and so on and so on. And I think the speed of coming to new solutions and different ways of going about things is much too low. There's a whole bunch of people sitting together in meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings, and nothing comes out. And I think this is one of them. It's nice for those people to be in the meetings, but very little comes out, and we need to speed up now a little bit. So what you're doing is not waiting, you just do it. But it only goes very slow because you have very limited resources. So in my opinion, we need to find something to produce speed in all these things, because otherwise it's too late.
Well, it's funny. I was actually asked by R3.0 to lead their education transformation blueprint. And when I started getting involved in the work here, I decided that I had too much time. I needed to spend more time on this work. So I stepped down from the leadership role and am now supporting the process with someone else leading, because I want to build a transformational education system and not simply write about it, which is exactly what you're saying. But as we're learning to do it, we also need to communicate what we're learning so others can accelerate their practice as well. So there is a bit of a paradox in this, but I also strongly feel the frustration you're describing of people have been talking about this for decades, and it's decades too late for some of our problems. So it's exactly when we need to be taking these practices into action.
But the communication is not the problem anymore with all the systems we have. But what I see, a lot of people talking and very little people doing.
Yeah. Well, this is one place for finance, because if enough people had livelihoods to go and live in a regenerative project and learn how to be trained in permaculture or other related things and be creating value by doing those things, then it would give them a transition pathway in their own lives. And that's something that I think is really important in all of this. All of the people that would like to live their lives doing this work, but don't have the capacity to do so, there is a financing element to that I think is really important. But yeah, you're hitting on something also really important, which is the disconnect between knowledge creation and actual doing, which is a big issue as well. So totally resonate with you on this. So thank you for the question and discussion. I really appreciate it.
I had another one, which is a little question. We have this solution for smallholder farmers in Africa, how to get them going and improve their soils and make more money than they're doing at the moment. Could be applied to what you are doing. So the question is, are you interested in listening to our solution?
I'm interested in more than listening.
Sorry, it's not a sales pitch. Don't misunderstand me. I'm just offering it.
I'm interested in more than listening. I think that creating bioregional learning centers that can teach each other is really important. So what we're doing here in Barichara can teach people in other places, but what you're doing with these farmers can be taught to other people as well. And what we really need is a coherent way for different regions to teach each other, so that we can learn from you and not become lost in choosing between 100 places of where we learn from. This is something we're trying to figure out in the study group, is how to structure this, because I see this as a really serious need, is how to have coherence in learning so that we can form these partnerships in a consistent manner across a very large number of places. So for me personally, I'm not actively making those connections in other places at the moment, because I'm trying to learn how to build coherence in one place that can work with other places, and then open that door to invite it very actively once we get a little further along, but not to wait very long. Maybe by later this year, we're actively collaborating, or beginning of next year, but in these next few months, we're still building this piece. But I don't see us waiting 2 years or 5 years or something, because there's no time for that.
Okay.
But I would absolutely love to learn from what you're doing and bring it here. I think that kind of exchange would be beautiful. And the people here, the campesinos here, are amazing survivors. So to have things to share with them would be wonderful.
Okay.
So yes, and thank you.
I have to.
Wait. Okay. Just to move on. Sorry, Bo, I didn't mean to cut you off as you were saying goodbye. I thought that we had finished. There was a small time lag there. But I think that this question and this topic is really important about how do we collaborate between our different regions? And that's something we can continue discussing in the study group. I see the next question that's being asked is by Rachel. So Rachel, I'll invite you onto the screen now. And the question is there a need for hands-on support? And I know that Rachel had posted before in the study group and the chat box that she's available to move. And so this might be a great opportunity for us to explore, how do we make these life transitions? So continuing her question, I know that travel is an issue at the moment, but looking long-term, is there a place and a need for skilled and semi-skilled people from outside the community? Rachel, I hope you're able to join me. Oh, you are? Good, because I want to have this conversation with you.
Good.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Welcome.
I'm great. Thank you. This is, it's just really exciting for me to even be part of this group. So thank you.
Absolutely. So what I'd love to start with is, from your perspective, the experience of wanting to put yourself into work like this. What is it like to have difficulty getting there. I have my own experience with it, but I think this is how we can start to build a discussion around your question.
Well, I tuned into your talk about the infrastructures and how. So I feel like I'm plugged into all these different organizations of people who are talking about it, and they're telling stories about, they're almost reached this sort of mythical proportions of certain people who have done these things. And I was like, well, I'd like to be part of that. I would like to live that life. I would like to make that commitment, because I think that it's about lifestyle as much as it is about restoration. Because if we can't share the idea that we need to be different on the planet, we can do all the restorations we want, but it's not sustainable, because people are just going to continue to do the same kind of ignorant and destructive things that they've been doing. So I'm ready. I've sold my condo. I've gotten rid of all my stuff. I'm staying with friends. I'm couch surfing, and I'm looking. And I know, the pandemic is not helping me here, but I check in with the embassies, weekly to see, what's the timeline, because I want to go. I want to go someplace where I can be, where I can learn. Because I have 20 years of experience in local prairie restoration work here in Wisconsin, and it's nice, but it's really kind of a group of very nice, well-meaning upper middle class white people in the suburbs who are doing this, and there's nothing wrong. I'm not putting them down because they're trying, but I'm really looking to to walk the walk and talk the talk. So, but I'm having kind of a hard time figuring out where to go with that.
Yeah, I can relate to this, because 3 years ago, my wife and I were living in Eugene, Oregon. Similar kind of thing, a very progressive town, a lot of environmentalists, and the Monkey Wrench gang started there in the Whitaker neighborhood, radical environmentalists back in the 60s. So there's this history of it. And yet she worked for the city government and found she actually got fired for speaking the truth about climate action when she was hired to implement their climate action plan because of corruption in U.S. institutions, just in general, even in a place like Eugene. So we have been on a journey ourselves to answer this question of how to live this way. And one thing I think is really important, really powerful, is how to take a step that allows you to sort of manage risk and experiment. So going to, if you were to say at the end of the lockdowns, you just decide, I really like what they're doing in Barichara, I'm going to go there for 2 months and just see what it's like. And just, show up on our doorstep. And what happens is it may not be the right place for you, or it may be, but if you went and committed yourself for the long term, you would feel trapped if it wasn't the right choice. But to go, if you have the capacity to go and be in a place for 2 or 3 months, you will learn a lot, and then you'll either know if that's a place to continue to be or to go to the next place, and you will radicalize your path as you go. And this is what I've learned is how to do it, is to go somewhere you're really inspired and where there's a place to land that you're not completely on your own. So you're like, well, if I at least, what we're trying to do with the Earth Regenerators group is create a learning, or at least what I'm doing, because my wife is doing reforestation work and it's in its own pattern of community work. What I'm doing with the study group and with the idea of creating a design school is I want a place for people from around the world to come here to learn this.
See, and I'd love to be part. I'd love to be part of creating something like that. I mean, that's what I know how to do. I'm a communicator and a marketer and a teacher, and the idea of being part. And I love to be involved in startup energy. Entrepreneurial stuff really just gets me very energized. And so, I mean, I would love to be part of that, and really in any way. And I'm really working on, organizing my life in such a way that I can, do that. But it's just a question of finding the right people. But I think you're right. I mean, as far as I've been talking to a couple of different people, and what they're saying to me is just come. Just when you can travel, when it's so safe to travel, just come and see and start talking to people. So I kind of think that's what I'll do.
And the other thing is that the big problem that happens is the disconnect between a good story and emotionally functioning human beings. Is you go to a place where there's a psychopath who's a narcissist who sells the story well, and it's actually a terrible place to be. But it's a great story. And so the key is to have either a good relationship with someone where you know there's someone you get along with, or people that you can sense know how to treat people well. And then you go there to take the first step. And you're pretty much, I wouldn't say you're guaranteed to have a good experience, but you're much more likely to have a good experience. And you also want to prepare yourself for it to not be the actual decision. You're not going because it's the place you're going to devote the rest of your life. You're going because you're beginning a journey to find the place you're going to be the rest of your life. And that gives you the flexibility to not be too critical and go with the flow and then shift or not, choosing, like when we came to Barichara, we came here for 3 months. We're like, we'll give 3 months to being here and see if we like it. At the end of 2 months, we're like, let's get our long-term visas. We love it here. Our daughter has a bunch of friends. All of the parents of our daughter's friends are great people. And the longer we're here, the more we're becoming part of the community. So now our plan is to stay here. But the original idea was to be here for 3 months. And so this experimental way of going is really the key.
Okay. Well, I would love to see where you are. And so, kind of, now that you've said that, in months ahead when travel's okay, I may show up on your doorstep. So
come on over.
Okay.
My friends know me as someone that's like, happened this morning. My wife was making crepes for our neighbors, and one of our friends comes by with their little daughter going for a walk, and we just invited them in and served them crepes. And then another friend walked by walking his dog, and we invited him in and had crepes. This is just the kind of people we are. And so yes, if you decide to come here, come here. If you decide to go somewhere else, go somewhere else.
Yes.
And the important thing is not that, like, someone like me is not a gatekeeper to say you can or cannot come. It's really your own heart and the community. You go somewhere and the community embraces you or it doesn't, and your heart tells you if you should be there.
Okay. Well, and I think it's important that there be some infrastructure in place as far as, there's a place to stay. There's opportunity to engage in some way. What I don't want is to be an east that I really don't want. I don't, it might start out that way, but that's not my goal. This would be a life. This would be a life.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. Like, I had someone show up in Barichara when was it? It was December or January? Early January. He and his partner just showed up here backpacking because they wanted to leave London, and he knew about my work. He asked me before we came if they might come and be involved, and I said, we haven't arrived there yet. We have no idea if there is work for us. So I couldn't offer him anything. And then they came, and then the lockdown occurred, and they're still here. They've gotten to be involved in digging some of the retention ponds with us and some of the planting of trees and getting to play with the kids. And they're learning Spanish because they didn't know any Spanish. And they now want to stay in the community, and they're lovely people. So it's like, that does happen. But they also knew when they came here that they might go somewhere else.
Right.
They just didn't know anywhere else to go, but to follow because they liked the way that I was thinking. And that's great. But most important is to have a good relationship with someone, or to have a sense that you can have a good relationship with someone. Because that's the foundation of it all. Is the relationship.
Yes, I think that's good. Good advice. I think we have to be human beings before we're human doings.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that inspires me. I think deep down I was looking for a little encouragement. So you have done that for me. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And you see the answer is actually so simple, it's deceptive. It's just take a trial run.
Just go. Just follow.
And look for good people.
Follow my bliss. Here.
Exactly. That's how it's done. Exactly that.
Thank you,
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. What I loved about that question is how important it is for us to learn how we can build relationships that honor local places. And so one way I was kind of dancing around Rachel's question was, I'm not going to tell you just to come here and I'm going to give you something to do, because I'm responding to what this place needs. So it's not my place to say. But if you feel called to come here and you're welcomed here when you arrive, and there's something you can do when you come, you will be on your way. And I think that's super, super important. So I see another question, and this is by Maritza, if Maritza's still with us. I hope Maritza comes on, because Maritza is one of the beautiful community leaders here doing great work. So Maritza, if you're still with us, I'd love to invite you in. How do you see the possibility to create a local currency in the regeneration process? Oh, I have so many ideas for this, Maritza. We have not yet talked about this. What I'll say, as I think Maritza is joining us, is I know that she is part of a group that is exploring how to create a community currency using water. Those of you in the study group will know that I wrote an article about this, a discussion piece about community currency based on water about a month ago. This is actually coming from the group that Maritza is part of. And so this is a live discussion, very active, as we're figuring out how to create it here in Barichara. So Maritza, I hope you're able to join us. While I'm waiting, in case you're not able to join us, is to say that this work on community currencies is extremely important for several reasons. For those who don't know about community currencies, we have some experts in the study group. So some of you may be here in this session right now. And I only know about it as like a professional sponge who absorbs other people's good ideas. So I don't know it as well as the practitioners. But one thing I know about community currencies, Vivek has just dropped the link into the chat box. Vivek is the master link finder for our group, among other things, is that community currencies allow you to create circulation of value and keep it within your community. So you can build a truly functioning circular economy. One thing about community currency related to the projects that I was showing in the presentation. So we had that 50 hectares of land in the mesa below, we had the aquifer to reforest above. We had the network of food solidarity with 10 fincas. Let's just take those pieces, because that's already quite a lot. What could a water-based currency do? Well, we also have the water brigade. We have people that have pickaxes, and they can go and dig ponds. I would love to have those people go to those 10 fincas or any finca where they could do water retention and do the work. Now, we don't have to have money to pay them if we give them those weekly food baskets, which are grown on those 10 farms. So if we have a way of tracking value with a community currency, we might pay the people who dig the retention ponds with a local currency, like a coupon that says, we'll give you the food basket this week. That then gives money to the farmers to grow the food that are giving it to the food basket, and also to the people organizing the food basket. And then the people organizing the food basket have money that they can distribute in other ways to build solidarity for food. Like they might give some of that money to someone that's giving a workshop on uses of the food to build local knowledge for native plants. So you see, we start to build circulation, and this creates a coordination between the different activities, so that the activities no longer are fragmented and separate. The money itself becomes the way of communicating value by seeing where the money flows. And you can do this physically with actual pieces of paper as coupons. You can do it digitally with an online dashboard or various other ways. But you can see how the creation of a money system that's only in the community allows you to create value, track value, and build coherence between the different projects. This is a secret of market economies. Market economies function because they have an information processing system with money and accounting. Now, there are a lot of problems with markets. So you have to structure a market so it's regenerative, and then use money and accounting to track the information of value as it's being created and circulated, which relates to PJ's question earlier, is what is the role of money from the outside as it relates to money flowing in the local system? You can explore all of this by designing a community currency. So those are some aspects to this question that I think are really powerful. And I guess Maritza wasn't able to join us. Oh, you are here, but for some reason, the technology didn't let you come in. We have this problem sometimes with Crowdcast that someone's web browser doesn't show them how to join. So I hope this at least answers your question enough a little bit. And I wish you were able to come in, because having spent a little time with Maritza, as I've said to her, I want to spend a lot more time with her, because she and her partner, Carlos, are doing fantastic work with food security and with water retention here in the community, and with this currency project. So, so I wish you were able to come on and share some of your knowledge. But I guess the tech isn't cooperating today, so I apologize for that. What I want to do now before going to the next question is just post a quick poll about how we're doing. Because I want to be sure that we we use our time well, and we have a really nice ability to use polls. So I'd love for you all to just answer this poll. How do you feel? Should we keep going, or are you kind of getting full of knowledge and you'd like to stop soon? Because we have about 20 more minutes and we can keep rolling. And I also see that the remaining questions don't have a lot of votes. So either vote for more questions or add more questions if you'd like them, or else I'll just keep going with the questions that are here. But I just want to do this as a quick feedback from people. So far, I'm getting a strong sense that we should keep going. So I'll keep rolling for now. And I see the next question is asked by Patty. Oh, wait, there's actually one by Mike that's got the same number of votes. And I think that I will go to the question that Mike asked, just because we haven't gotten a chance to talk yet. If that's okay with you, Patty, I hope it is. So Mike, I'll invite you onto the screen. The question is, some time ago, there was mention of distributed ledger technologies. And the Bitcoin white paper has nothing to do with, okay, yeah, it is not about fiat currency. I agree. Has this subject been discussed recently? This relates to money too, of course. So what Mike is talking about here is distributed ledger systems, or what blockchain is. Bitcoin is a type of currency. It's actually an extractive pyramid scheme of money, whereas blockchain is a distributed ledger, where you have a ledger, a way of like a bookkeeping system that is distributed across many different people's accounts. And that's what a distributed ledger technology is, at least described simply. And so what I want to share, and I hope Mike is able to join me to talk about this, is that these technologies are really, really useful for creating alternative economies. And Mike, I'm guessing by asking this question that you know a thing or two about this topic. I'd love to hear more of what you're thinking with distributed ledger, or just which part of it you'd like to share right now, now that the conversation's maybe moved on.
Yeah, thank you for giving me a few minutes here. I've been following all this since Ethereum came out, basically, because I read the Ethereum white paper and it made a lot of sense to me. And just to characterize that, the big difference, the two big names so far in this world are Bitcoin and Ethereum, really. And the difference between them is that Ethereum is a programming paradigm where you can create, you can make things smart by something called smart contracts. And that made a really quantum leap into what could be done with what are known as distributed ledger technologies. And to be very, very basic about it, although I know some people will probably jump on me for saying this, pretty much everything has a database behind it. You know, pretty much every website you go to, even though it just looks like images and videos and what we're doing now, there's a database at the back of it. And the thing about databases of that kind is they're centralized. So they're in one place. There may be multiple copies of them for redundancy. As opposed to that, distributed ledgers are data stores which are distributed across a network, whatever that network may be. And a blockchain is the most, typical version of that, although there are others where the data is stored in blocks and those blocks are shared among everybody. And there's a thing called immutability, which means anything entered on the blockchain can't be deleted by anyone. So that's a powerful differential. There's redundancy because it's everywhere. The downside of it is, which is what a lot of publicity you hear about, is the blocks get big over time. and they get harder to distribute and harder to change. But the main point about this is that I really wanted to get to is, yeah, holochain is great. I'm fairly well vested into holochain, although it's taken them a bit longer to get out than they would like, I know. But anyway, the whole point about these technologies and Web3 in its whole ethos is we get away from examples like Facebook and Google and Twitter and so on, which are centralized control systems, and we get to a situation where we can distribute data and value, which is the important part, about across networks. And I won't go on too long, but one of the great things that people say is, hang on a minute, what happens if we lose electricity, or what happens if the internet goes away? Well, if the internet goes away and we lose electricity, everything, particularly with the electricity bit, everything that we know as being normal will go away. So it's sort of a disingenuous question. And I have a great faith in it. And yeah, I'm pretty much involved in it. I think, just to finish off by saying, to exchange value, which is really what fiat currency gives us the ability to do, it's much easier to do in an uncontrolled way. By uncontrolled, I mean by the powers that be, in something like distributed ledger. So with that being said, that's it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. One way that I think about this is, to use a concrete example, is how you can create value chains, connections between value creation that enable people to collaborate with each other. One of my friends is a guy named Kamal Patel, who lives in Seattle and uses holochain and is designing a circular economy system around an organic tofu factory on Vashon Island, which is very close to Seattle. And this factory has a biodigester. The biodigester produces a liquid that you can use to fertilize crops, and it produces methane. So they give the fertilizer to the farmers that are providing the soybeans for the tofu, and they're giving the gas to a local school to cook all their food. And then the county government wants to make all of this easy to do, so they provided a tax incentive and a subsidy to build the biodigester.
Okay.
Nancy Guy is saying, yeah, this is a really great project, and they're using holochain to build the dashboard.
Okay, great.
And the reason for this relates to what you're saying, and I'm sort of translating this for the non-technical people. The reason that they're doing this is that once they build the dashboard using holochain, the data is structured in a way that it is interoperable, meaning you can build new relationships of that data to new data. And the API, the little transfer systems that receives or sends information from one place to another, holochain is structured so that is always very easy to put together. So you can start to build a new economic system by taking this global model, tofu, biodigester, farm, school, county government, little bitty cycle. It's a little test project, and you could replicate it 100 times.
Yeah.
You could use it to finance biodigesters for other people. So the system, the network of relationships owns the biodigester. But the equity is distributed by the ledger system, which is a dashboard.
Yeah, great.
And so you see, like, this is something that becomes possible using this technology, and then it's completely decentralized, meaning that it sort of grows from relationships that are coherent and make sense. It only grows as long as they remain coherent and make sense.
Yeah.
Which is what we need for new economies. So
Exactly.
I think this is super important, Mike. Super important.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking the question and promoting this topic. And also the smart contract thing, because Mike, because you brought it up, and those who don't know, one thing about a smart contract is you can think of it as like a threshold that is crossed when a criteria is met.
Right.
So like for carbon offsets or something they're doing with the Regen network, where there might be a nonprofit that is receiving money from the World Bank or from the UN that says, we will pay for verified carbon offsets. And there's an agroforestry project in Brazil that is using drones and remote sensing to track how much carbon is being embodied in those trees, and they have really rigorous methods. So they say, we have now hit the threshold for selling an offset. Someone can buy an offset from us. The smart contract is activated by this verification. Yeah. And this is something that smart contracts can do, which is absolutely amazing, because you don't need a centralized certification system, which is slow and cumbersome.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, super, super powerful.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Mike, before we go on?
No,
Or
no, only that I'm in Eugene, Oregon, and I'm a friend of Jim Bledsoe also. But
Nice. Well, my wife and I were married up the McKenzie. We love Eugene.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a great.
So saying hello from one bioregion to another, we miss Cascadia, but we love it here.
I'm sure.
All right, thanks a lot, Mike.
Thank you.
Such an important topic because this technology that seems esoteric and can sort of confuse and overwhelm us is actually really important for us to understand. And so I really am glad that it's attention is being offered. I see a question that was asked by Carla that now has 3 votes, but Carla's not here for me to invite to answer. Or maybe I invited you earlier this year. Your question was, why not design bigger and better planned retention system before it rains? Well, Carla, I'm just going to answer this question quickly because something is happening right now that is sort of answering this question itself. There's a long history of corruption, confusion, and lack of good communication around water issues. So there's a whole story to this that I won't go into right now because we don't have time. And I'm only in the process of learning it, so I don't want to accidentally tell the story wrong. But one thing that is happening right now is there is a community water group that is being formed, partnering with the municipal government to be able to plan some of these water retention projects. And there's currently not capacity or resources in the municipal government to manage that capacity. So this question is beginning to answer itself, that the community is creating its own capacity to manage larger scale water retention systems. And we hope to do a lot more of this as time goes on. But it hasn't been done in the past because of the lack of shared vision, the lack of coordination and communication, and some stories of corruption with a previous mayor who privatized the water system, and other things too. But it's actually a beautifully rich and complex question of why it hasn't been done in the past. But what's really inspiring is that a lot of this is being done right now to address the problem, so that the next big rain, hopefully, we'll be ready for it. But such an important question. I see we're now getting down to the last 10 minutes. And what I want to do is be sure that that we use this time wisely. Patty asked a question. It says, please feel free to, because I see we sort of addressed Bo's question earlier and it jumped to the top for me just now, but I'm going to start answering this question from Patty without inviting you onto the screen, Patty, if that's okay. It says, I am tempted to ask if you have an adaptable scientific framework to measure the impact of your community's work so it can be communicated to stakeholders. This is actually some work that we're in the process of creating, and we have some partners who are developing it. So what Patty's asking is there a rigorous framework for looking at the value that is created when we're talking about the scale and complexity of what we're discussing today? The answer is there are people building pieces of this. There are funders who want to create impact funds to fund this, and there is not yet a proven scaled model, a model at scale that people are funding to do this. There are a lot of pieces that look very similar, but this specific piece is still missing. And there's some groups that are working to build it. What I would love to do is partner with those groups to just map what we are doing here to become the prototype without any funding. Just map it. Create a portfolio for funding around this, and then use that to demonstrate how to create these portfolios for others. And that's something we're creating in the Earth Regeneration Fund as part of this discussion in the Earth Regenerator Study Group. Is there are scientifically rigorous ways of doing this, using multi-capital frameworks, ESG measurement systems, what's called multi-level cultural selection, pro-social, and other tools that you can put together to do this. But there's not a functioning model yet that's there enough to be able to show to people. But I think we need one of those by the end of the year. And so this is a really urgent and critical thing, and you've hit on something very important. So I just think that's a really, really big thing. What I think we're going to do now because we're now getting to the point where we're nearing a wrap up. And so I'd like to start to transition to say that I hope you've all learned a lot from the presentation and from the discussion. I feel like this discussion has been really rich and powerful. And in the study group, what I'd like to do is create more capacity for us to learn from this scale of projects. What we're doing in Barichara, I will translate for people to learn about, but I'd love to start building this relationship to other bioregions so that we can create different working groups in the study group that focus on their own bioregion, and we learn how to teach each other so that we can prototype this process. The other thing that I want to really say is that I feel humbled. I really do. I feel humbled for my family to get to be here doing this work. And I hope that by the time the lockdown ends, currently Colombia is not allowing international traffic, air traffic to come in until at least September 1st. So for a few more months, people can't come here. But I'm really hoping we can use this place to show others what this place can offer and create educational learning opportunities to replace some of the tourism that has gone away and to do this work. And I also hope that we can continue having these conversations in the study group. So for those of you who want to join the study group right away. I really hope you'll come join us there. And we'll keep working in the spirit of the gift economy to do this work. So thank you all for being here, for your attention, your participation. And I really want to help all of you to become better Earth regenerations in the months and the years ahead. So thank you all for your time, and really just feeling deep gratitude to be in this place. And then I'll close by showing you something, that if you look at the roof of my house, that is cañas, which is the type of grass similar to sugarcane. And here is earthen construction. We are living in a passive house that was designed hundreds of years ago, this model of architecture, because of the continuity of culture in this place. And so the only reason we can do this regeneration is because of that culture. So look for that culture and the depth and richness of it in your own place. Seek out the indigenous knowledge of your place and look at how you can bring it back to your landscapes. So with that, I thank you all. I really appreciate each of you, and I'm glad we're on this journey together. So thank you.